Hello everyone. Today we're looking at scopes and zooms. Now that they have recently added how we can actually have magnification on our sights. And here's a really quick summary, just so you don't have to watch the entire video. If you do want to watch more of the video, you can watch and see the more of the details, more specifics. But essentially, generally speaking, what I recommend is your world FOV to be around 100 to 110 degrees. I personally use 105 right now. And then the field of view, generally speaking, can be down to 70 degrees to about 95, depending on how much zoom you want. If you want your general looking around FOV to be zoomed in, you want to turn it down. So the higher you turn it up, you'll have more awareness. And then when it comes to the field of view of your weapon, higher it is, the more away your weapon is going to be from your face, and therefore your zoom is going to be smaller. And therefore the things in your sight picture are actually going to be much smaller as well. So it'll be harder to see down that sight. You'll actually see duplicates, as you can kind of see here. So if you do want to see a bit more into your scope with better zoom and better magnification, you go to your options, graphics, and then you turn your field of view down. The lower this is, the better. If it's super low, you will start to notice a black ring around it. This is also based on your world FOV. So if you have this increased, you'll see more of it. So generally speaking, the balance that you want to kind of strike is a slightly lower FOV, and the lower the better. So you don't see that ring. If you're at like 110 zoom, you'll still see that ring of the scope when you're turning and moving. It's a little bit annoying. So you might want to turn it down a little bit, a couple degrees. As I said, I have 105 is kind of where I put it at. And then 70 degrees and kind of onward is reasonable in terms of like seeing down your sight zoom. And you can obviously go higher or lower depending on how you feel about how much zoom you want. I've been kind of sticking with 85 just recently with my recent testing. So one other important thing about this kind of FOV thing, it's going to be different for every site. So what might work for the 1 to 4 zoom might not work for the 1 to 12 zoom. So try to fiddle around with your settings. Generally speaking, they'll probably be relatively decent all the way around. You still can't really see the edges of the scope at this 105 kind of world FOV. So this is probably where you probably want to keep it. So as I said, this is my recommended one. Probably turn it up more if you want a little bit more zoom and see more into your scope. Make sure you don't have the world FOV too high, otherwise you see that black ring. And then turn it down much lower if you want an insane amount of zoom. You will have to deal with that black circle. If you lower it to like a lower field of view, you'll probably want to lower your world field of view as well to compensate for seeing that black circle, because the lower you have that, the less of that black circle you're going to see. So just kind of balance them together so you're not seeing as much as that black circle. So just something to consider. You obviously have this gun kind of clouding a lot of your face, of course, so it'll be harder to see generally. So that's why I say recommend staying kind of at that like 110 to 105 range. And then depending on how much zoom you want, kind of doing that based off of that. So you can still see decently with some magnification, even though it does say 1x zoom. You'll have a just slightly better zoom when you're looking at the optic. And if you don't want that, then obviously you just turn that back up, that field of view, and then you can take those shots a little bit better. So that is the summary. If you guys do want to watch and see a bit more of the details, the finer details, just keep watching. With that said, getting into more of the details here. If you go to your settings and look at your world FOV, which stands for field of view, you'll actually notice that there is another type of field of view for your weapon. Now, obviously you have to turn this on. So at 80%, this is what it's going to look like. At the default weapon field of view, this is what it's going to look like. So as you can see, it's like, you know, pretty standard, nothing too crazy. The magnification looks pretty one-to-one. You could argue that it looks exactly the same with some minor, just, you know, different types of warping of the image picture. And of course, you have to look through a specific site to obviously see. And obviously, if you look at the zoom, it looks about the same. Now, obviously, what you can change and do, if you want to have a better sight picture, depending. Now, let's just do max world FOV and kind of just see what's happening. So you kind of see that everywhere around the weapon zoomed out, but the weapon still has decent like target sight picture. You'll actually notice that it's actually larger in the sight. So that means you are more zoomed in, technically speaking. Now, what does this really mean? Well, it means for a 1 times zoom, you're going to have a more zoomed in sight whenever you are zooming in. So that means even though it is 1 times the zoom, it's not going to be 1 for 1 in the sight picture when you are aiming, let's say, without it. So what does this mean? So obviously the purpose of this would be to use some type of magnification scope or sight, and then you can use it whenever you need to shoot those just slightly longer shots just for a little bit more accuracy, right? But we can also look at the weapon field of view. Now let's just take these to 100 and kind of just compare and kind of show this off. You have 100 degrees. Everything's kind of 1 for 1, technically speaking. It looks a little bit zoomed in, but it looks very 1 to 1 in terms of its general like scale, I'll call it. Now, when you skew the world FOV, and I'll skew it very poorly so it's zoomed in, you'll notice that the sight is actually theoretically slightly less zoomed in, weirdly enough. So basically the idea that you're going to have here is whenever you have your field of view for your weapon increased, it'll be further away from your face. So that means the zoom will be smaller. So as you look down the sight right here, you'll actually notice that the image gets smaller. Obviously, this will make it a little bit harder to aim, and it'll create some warping. So you can actually see the picture twice, as you can kind of see. So the idea here is what you want to do is turn down your weapon field of view and turn up your world FOV. And if you zoom in just slightly, it's just slightly zoomed in. It's nothing too crazy, but it's not 1 time zoom. You wouldn't be looking through this as like a regular dot sight, for example. But what this allows you to do is take a little bit more accurate shots. Now, obviously you can fiddle with these settings to kind of see what you like, but generally speaking, the more weapon FOV, as you'll see here, technically the bigger the sight picture. Now we have this weird interaction going on where you actually see inside the actual scope, and it's actually harder to see. And this is the 1 time zoom, and it looks like it's very zoomed in. And if we do 4 times, obviously even more zoomed in. This is pretty close to like 12 times zoom comparison to if you have the other sight. So essentially, if you just want to think about it like this, when you increase the weapon FOV, you decrease your zoom. So if you max it out, it'll be less zoom and the picture will be smaller. And if you decrease it, that sight picture will be a little bit bigger. So generally speaking, I was playing around with it, and depending on the type of player you want to be, if you want to be taking more accurate shots, let's say on that new bank level, you can get a little bit more zoom, and you can live with this kind of sight. Also, having this kind of range, you can actually also zoom in a little bit, as you can kind of see. I don't have ADS zoom for this example here, but it's important to note that you can still shoot with this very accurately. I was using and testing this kind of scaling out. It doesn't hurt too bad, honestly, as long as you're like generally aware of what you're doing. Having a little bit more general zoom in your default view is actually pretty helpful for seeing certain things and identifying certain things. So now I do want to note something about recoil. Now, when you are zoomed in more, generally speaking with the FOV settings, if you are shooting and firing, you'll actually have a harder time managing recoil. Now, why is this? It's because the weapon is moving up more because you're zoomed in more. It's a little bit confusing, but essentially what you want to look at is basically kind of finding a balance for the level of recoil control that you can maintain. I usually range, and I've been testing and kind of trying to hone in exactly what I want, but like having a field of view of 110 is generally good. And then ranging from anywhere from 70 to like 85 to still have that maintaining of slightly increased zoom whenever you are using a sight. So it's like a big enough, so you can look into the sight picture where it's big enough, you can zoom in where it's not a problem, and the recoil doesn't seem to be too bad, right? Generally speaking, like you can still take single shots, it's not bad. And then when you're shooting like this, you can shoot and control your weapon. Generally speaking, I feel like I really don't need ADS zoom for these settings, but I have been experimenting with these. I'm still trying to figure everything out, but I just wanted to bring this to everyone's attention and kind of get everyone thinking like, oh, like, hey, what kind of settings should I have when I'm using a sight picture? And it's important to note that generally speaking, I will say this just outright. When you are using a sight like this, you are probably going to have lower reaction time. Now, why is that? Well, because when you're right here, all you have to do is something very simple. Point that green dot or red dot, depending on what laser pointer you're using, at that target and line it up and shoot the target. So it just needs to touch, and it's very, you know what's going on. You can check out at different distances and ranges. Whereas if you have the digital sight or any other type of like sight, and even at 1x zoom, you're going to have to find and seek where that target is. And generally speaking, you can kind of get better at this, but you really have to focus on trying to find where those things are. And especially if you're seeking for something, it's not really great, especially when you are in such a location where you have to cover maybe multiple lanes of fire. Having your sight like this is going to be, like having a canto sight is going to be much more, it's going to give you better acquisition for targeting various suspects, right, is the idea. So most of the time, whenever I am zooming in like this, it is to take precision shots, or if it's like a very, very tight lane of fire. So for example, if it encompasses like this much room, it's like a single door. And if I do need to take a precision shot for a, let's say, a hostage when there's a bunch of civilians around, which is, you know, for example, in that bank area, I guess I can look at the 12x zoom, 1 to 12x zoom. It is going to be a little bit different. So your settings may vary if you are using the ATAC versus the SDR versus this new one that we just got. There is going to be different types of magnification zoom on each one. So you might want to put the settings on what is kind of comfortable for you. So it will vary site to site to make that very clear, but it's important to kind of see which one you like the most. I actually have been trying to use the SDR and I have been getting good success out of it. Also, the reason why I want to start using the SDR is that it has natural vertical recoil reduction. And of course, there is no other site that has that as a stat labeled on it. Now, whether or not that actually provides any reduction to vertical recoil is another thing entirely. But I have noticed some differences in recoil reduction. It's probably like 10% or something, nothing too big or too small. Nothing too big. Now, when it comes to the 12x sight, basically wherever you see that green dot, that's pretty close to the analog of where you're going to be hitting that target. More or less just spot on, really. And if you zoom in, it's the same thing. It's going to be below that. And if you zoom in all the way, you can kind of see the mill dots and where. And of course, like if you're doing an angled shot, canted sight, you can see kind of where you're firing. So obviously this is going to be variable. And sometimes you will see that inner sight, I think, with the 12x sight, if you kind of notice it, you'll see that blackening of the edges within the sight of the magnification. And this is going to be the case. You will have to fiddle around with your graphics, inside graphics here, and it'll be the FOV. So just fiddle around with these. You can kind of see, like, if I do this, you're not going to see those black edges of the sight, right? So it's not going to be, it's going to be kind of a bit more snappier and give you more visual kind of acquisition. But obviously it's going to be a little bit harder to see when you're taking those longer shots. You might need to zoom in even more. And obviously 12x zoom, I believe it's basically always seems to be that much type of zoom, as is kind of like how close your face is to the actual object. But kind of fiddle around with it, kind of see what you guys like for your preferred optic. And you can kind of like balance it. So like if you feel like you see too much of that while you're moving around or turning quickly, you don't want to see too much of it. Because if you turn it down, that's when you get this thing where you can actually see within the scope, and it's very cloudy, and like, why would you ever want this, obviously, right? So aim for your FOV. Generally speaking, it's probably going to be a little bit higher. It's going to be like 100 or higher, I imagine. I usually do like 105 to 110, and then I'm usually ranging from like, I've been testing it out, as I said, but I've just been playing around with it, 70 to about like 95 range. So 70 to 95 range for the field of view with the weapon. I'm not quite sure what the FOV scaling, what the world does for vertical versus horizontal. I've been playing around with it. It's really hard to tell the differences. I'd probably have to take an exactly same type of picture to really see the differences. I was having mine at vertical. I just set mine, or sorry, my one was at horizontal. I started to just do vertical, and I haven't really been noticing the difference. So I just set it to either one. I'm really not quite sure what this does, quite frankly, in terms of visually. Mine's is vertical right now, and I've been doing fine. So anyway, yeah, so play around with that. Let me know what you guys have your setup as. I'd be kind of curious to see what you guys are doing for your setup. This is 1x zoom. As you can see, it is a magnification, it seems, decently enough. Gives you more visual sight. But anyway, that is going to be the end of the video. Let me know what you guys think about this interesting setup that you can do for your weapons. Let me know what you guys use, weapon, attachments, sight. I'd be really curious to see what you guys are doing. And then let me know what you guys are doing for your FOV field of view. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching and have a good day.